You know, Bioware as a developer has always kind of existed in a blind spot for me. Despite all the things I've heard about them, both good and bad, I've never really engaged with their games on a personal level, though I did try with Dragon Age. While I never played the first game, I did play a bit of Exodus and Inquisition to varying results. I played Exodus for a bit at a friend's house before we got bored and moved on to something else, and I only really played long enough to meet this very friendly mage whose name I don't remember, who cut herself and said that the demon in her head was very cordial. I think I remember liking the gameplay okay, but other than that, all I remember is that the game largely took place in a city with a population that was 90% angry brigands that would attack you at random on the streets, to 10% people who never left their houses for fear of being attacked on the streets at random by angry brigands. A long while later, I tried my hand at Inquisition, but that was a single-player MMO, so I didn't even last a full 2 hours before going, "Oh fuck, I am so bored," and returning the game. So suffice it to say, Veilguard's announcement didn't exactly inspire much interest in me, and I doubt I would have played it at all if it hadn't been for the large number of people in the comments section of my non-binary character design video who were really interested in hearing what I had to say about Taash and the game's approach to non-binary and trans characters, which did pique my interest. And so, after checking to make sure it wasn't another fucking MMO like Inquisition, and receiving a very kind donation to help me afford the game, I decided to give it a go. And you know what, viewer? I'm glad I did, because while I wasn't sure what to actually expect from Veilguard, especially after its first trailer made it out to be some kind of hero shooter or something, I was anything but disappointed with it. And since I'd promised to give the game a full review, well, here we are. Before I begin though, allow me to establish a couple of things. First, I won't be covering the drama surrounding the game's development, nor am I interested in hearing about it. As is true when I review anything, I'll be judging the game strictly on its own merits as a work of art, and I largely won't be judging it as a Dragon Age game either, but as a game in its own right. Second, while I'm about as much of a newcomer to the series as you can be without never having heard of it, I have looked into the series enough in preparation for this video to have the barest of bones understanding of the world and its story, as well as that of the other games a little bit. Finally, if you're specifically here for my take on the transgender and non-binary subject, that actually has its own dedicated section, so you can jump right into that if that's all you're interested in. I'll also have a section dedicated to my criticism of the game as well, in case you're someone who's just here because you want to hear the game get turned into a bit. Also, if you have questions about anything I don't cover in the video, please feel free to shoot me an ask on Tumblr, link in the down there bit. Alrighty then, I think that covers all of my bases. Now let's get started, shall we? It's time to talk about overthrowing tyrants and slaying the gods with the power of friendship and a knife.
You see the truth behind the veil, and you know that they're just looking for attention. Oh, you don't let the ruthlessness prevail. Oh, it's time to light your fires for ascension. Like a phoenix, you burst in a fire burn. A thirst and desire, you transform right up in a flash. You spread your wings to rise from the ashes. Phoenix, you burst in a fire burn. A thirst and desire, you transform right up in a flash. You spread your wings to rise from the ashes.
Let's try this again. Where's Navgalis?
You think you can come into my bar and make demands?
Okay, so unlike previous games, which generally fell into a weird middle ground between action and Infinity Engine gameplay styles, Veilguard falls directly into the genre of action RPG, such as Kingdom Hearts or Dark Souls, where the emphasis is on dodging, reading enemy attack patterns, and then striking back with all the rage you built up waiting for an opening in the ridiculous string of attacks the boss is throwing at you. I know some people probably don't like the change, but as someone who loves both Kingdom Hearts and the Soulsborne series, this is exactly what I wanted. There's also no stamina bar to worry about, so you can dodge to your heart's content, so long as you time it properly and don't roll directly into a demon's oncoming energy blast like the blind sad sack I mean you are. Full transparency, I went with a mage for my playthrough. When you build your character, you get to choose between fighter, rogue, or mage, and I opted for the one that has fucking magic because it's a fucking fantasy game and magic is my jam and also a lot more fucking fun. So that's how that went. What, you didn't even try the other two? Well, I mean, I did consider it. I thought to myself, okay Writin, do you want to plink away at enemies with a dinky little bow, or assault them with the primal wrath of nature? Decisions. I really have to think this choice through before I... So yeah, I went with mage. I am of course being facetious. Veilguard actually does a really great job of making the classes all feel very bombastic and fun to play. I just feel more of an affinity for magic classes. I actually did test runs of the other two classes after I finished my mage playthrough and found them perfectly serviceable, just not what I'm looking for. As I said before, combat revolves around dodging and keeping track of enemy patterns, and it's quite fun. Double tapping the dodge button will give you a longer dodge with more iframes, and you have the ability to block as well. If you're looking for more of a challenge, the rogue is the only class that doesn't have an extended block ability, requiring faster reflexes and better timing, so people who enjoy parry builds will probably want to try that one. For the other two, your block changes depending on which weapon you have equipped. The staff for mages and the sword and shield for the warrior gives you a held block, while the mage knife and orb and the warhammer give you a parry window. Your offense largely revolves around light and heavy attacks and chaining them together, depending on the weapon. You can also charge your attacks to deal more damage and break through enemy armor faster. The strong attack for the mage's staff builds up over time and as you use light attacks, and a fully charged strong attack will add a damage over time effect to the enemy, depending on the element associated with the weapon. It deals high damage and stagger in an arc, so it's good against closely grouped enemies. Alternatively, the light attacks with the orb build up arcane charges in damaged enemies, and once you have 3 charges, a heavy attack will detonate an arcane bomb for heavier single target damage. I favoured this tactic for most of the game because I prefer speed, but either one will get the job done. You also have abilities, which rely on a class-specific resource. Mana for mages, rage for warriors, and tax evasion for rogues. The martial classes both have to attack to build their resource meter, but mages generate theirs automatically, which is just one of the many ways wizards are superior to fighters, Kevin. You only start with one ability, but you unlock more as you level up, and which ones you end up with will largely depend on the playstyle you prefer, with each class having 3 specializations to choose from. And you will have to choose, as your level caps at 50 and you can't take everything. You can refund any skill points you invest, however, so you'll always be able to respec your character to try something new. Can't change your class though, so make peace with whatever god you worship if you choose poorly. As far as actual combat goes, you'll generally be joined by 2 companions. You'll have to manage their skills and equipment yourself, however, and they don't tend to deal much damage outside of their activated abilities, so you can't really rely on them to finish off your enemies otherwise. You will, however, rely on them to set up detonations. Detonations are the new, for lack of a better term, thing that the game adds to the series. Certain abilities will add status effects that act as primers, and other abilities will detonate specific primers. Detonations blast for big damage in an area and will also deal a lot of stagger, and a lot of boss fights are made much harder if you don't have companions with detonation compatibility. Your own abilities can also act as both primers and detonators, but you won't be able to detonate your own, and it's best to bring companions that can reliably detonate for you. It's not strictly necessary, but bringing all the ingredients for a small-scale DIY nuke makes combat much easier, go figure. Also, just an FYI, most combat scenarios will involve a quick guy, a tank, and a ranged attacker, and you should always take out the fucker in the back, because he will keep throwing things at your face when you're trying to take down the guy wielding a broadsword that could cleave a car in half, and it is not helpful. So yeah, take out the ranged fucker first. They are weak little babies, destroy them. Also, and this is important to know, you're actually briefly invincible when activating your abilities, so make a good use of those iframes. Combat can be pretty overwhelming at times, and making sure that you have a moment to breathe can make all the difference. Also healing. Healing is very important. It keeps you not dead. Your healing will come from two primary sources, potions and companions. You keep a small stock of potions that you can use at any time and replenish by smashing green jars, and the potency of your potions is directly connected to the belt or sash you have equipped. Certain equipment can also further increase your healing output or add additional effects to the potions, so keep an eye on all of that. Also, the vast majority of boss fights will have green pots scattered around the edges of the arena, so keep an eye out for those. Don't make the same mistake I kept fucking making and ignore them, only to drag yourself across the finish line of a fight with a quarter cup of blood left in your body and 2/3 of your bones crumbling into dust. Otherwise, several of your companions are also capable of healing you. The healing is all largely comparable, but each companion will have their own bonuses to healing, like replenishing a bit of ult charge or automatically healing you at certain thresholds. The amount they heal you for is also tied to their bond level, so they'll heal more and better as you spend more time with them and progress through the story. Do you get what I'm saying? Yes, manipulate your friends so they keep you alive. Oh, don't give me that look, you're the fucking hero. It's not shady when you do it. Also, don't worry about healing your allies because they can't die. They don't even have health bars. Outside of cutscenes, the immortal bastards can't even be hurt, so you're free to chug all the healing potions like the sad little piss baby you are. Why do they even need us in combat if we're the only ones who can bleed? Finally, you'll be finding new gear and swapping out for better models all the time. It's important to know that each piece of equipment has several effects that will be locked the first time you find it, and will only become unlocked as you find copies of the gear elsewhere. So if you find an item that you think will define your playstyle later, keep hold of it. It's actually pretty easy to find something that suits your combat preferences and then just keep upgrading it at the blacksmith. Try checking the shops, you can usually find a copy of something there. For example, I found a mage knife that restored a small amount of HP every time I activated an arcane bomb, which turned all the weaker minions that the bosses would constantly summon into a line of free potion shots at the combat bar, and I never fucking died to a minion swarm again. I didn't swap that thing out for anything, not even the super special legendary god knife you only get after successfully talking down the prickliest bitch in the Fade. So yeah, find what works for you and cherish it. I love this knife, I named him Jimothy. Honestly, the combat system works pretty well. I do have my complaints, but as usual, I'm saving my criticisms for their own section. Outside of combat, you'll largely be exploring, interacting with people, solving a few relatively simple puzzles, and doing a lot of talking. The talking is where you'll find the most roleplay potential, as Dragon Age's conversation wheel makes a triumphant return, allowing you to reply to people's statements in a way that you feel best matches your rook's personality. Most responses are limited to either the friendly, funny, or hard-ass options, but occasionally you're given additional options, such as asking for more information, showing sympathy or alarm, or responding in a background-specific way, such as a mage being able to give their take on hardening stone magic, a shadow dragon connecting with Nev thanks to their shared experience fighting Venatori slavers, or an elf bonding with Balara over their shared disappointment that their gods are massive douchebags trying to end the world with magic super cancer. You know, just the usual break room chatter, nothing major. How you respond to people will affect your companion's approval of you, which I would caution against lowering too much since their growth is tied to it, but you'll be spending enough time with them that it'll hardly be an issue. Be true to yourself and play the sarcastic bitch you were born to be.
That's really helpful. What are you, the elven god of sarcasm?
Fucking got 'em. Finally, make sure you collect keepsakes. They empower the caretaker and allow them to upgrade your equipment more, so get as many as you can, you're gonna need them. Okay, moving on.
Maybe the gods change things and the old rules don't apply. Why is being alive a problem?
Because I didn't expect to be here. Grey Wardens have an expiration. It pushed me.
Okay, so Veilguard starts with you trying to stop the end of the world. Some bold bastard named Solus is attempting to tear down the Veil for personal reasons he's not entirely keen to share, and so it falls to Varric, some dwarf that keeps showing up in every game, to try to stop his friend from flooding the world in demons and angry spirits. To this end, he recruits an adorable Inquisition scout named Harding, who looks a lot like the first and only girlfriend I had before I realised I was gay, a magic detective named Nev Gallus, who dresses like she's on her way to give a lecture on winning battles through out-cunting your opponent, and Rook, the player character who used to be a member of one of the continent's 6 major factions and is honestly just stoked to be here. For the record, I chose these shadow dragons for my background because I thought an elven mage, someone who's a member of 2 historically oppressed minorities, would be an amazing fit for an anti-slavery coalition. It was a fun roleplay opportunity, I highly recommend it. The quartet of heroes manage to track Solus down to his apocalypse ritual, where Varric decides to try talking his old friend down, while you attempt to disrupt the ritual with the ancient elven art of massive property damage. Yeah, it doesn't quite work. Varric gets stabbed, you get concussed, and Solus gets sucked into the void, forcing you to retreat to avoid being blown up. You also bled onto the ritual site, a little known side effect of head trauma, meaning Solus was able to use your blood to establish a psychic connection and become the incredibly haughty bearer of even more bad news. Disrupting the ritual also released the Evanurus, two incredibly evil and powerful elven gods who want to use the Blight to burn down the world and remake it in their deranged image. And now the only person that, possessed enough power to face them, is imprisoned in the Fade and can't actually help. Good job, Rook, your story's off to a great start. At least you still have Eric with his helpful advice and expertise. I mean, he barely moves from his bed in hospice care and nobody else acknowledges his existence, but I'm sure that's nothing to worry about. Varric names Rook the leader of the Veilguard and tasks them with stopping Elgranon and Gillinane. How do they plan to do that? Well, you take this trio and build it into a true ragtag group of misfits by recruiting experts on the Fade, elven history and technology, slaying blight-infested monsters, stabbing people, and killing really big things that fly around and breathe fire and lightning, all while building their trust and strengthening their factions enough that they'll be able to survive when you shove the power of friendship up Elgranon's ass in the final confrontation and pull the trigger. Okay, so it isn't the best plan, but Rook was fired from the last job for being too excited to free slaves, and they weren't expecting to have to deal with one elven god, let alone two. They're doing their best, okay? Oh yeah, Solus is an elven god, by the way. What was his portfolio again?
Lies, treachery, and rebellion, depending upon the story.
Yes, he seems trustworthy. I'm glad he's unequivocally on our side and has absolutely no ulterior motive or reason to backstab us. In all seriousness, I quite like the story Veilguard sets up. It actually establishes these stakes very early on when you reach Demeter's Crossing and witness firsthand the horrors the gods are not only able to inflict on the world, but are all too eager to. This game actually gets exceptionally dark at times, and you're constantly on the back foot as you desperately try to mitigate the damage caused by the gods' influence while building your own strength to the point that you can combat their powers at all. Despite the characters attempting to make light of the situation, there's a serious air of desperation to the whole operation. You're basically just a nobody with no real power or influence, making the admittedly pretty hard to believe claim that the ancient elven gods have returned and are controlling the Blight to destroy the world, so people are understandably skeptical at the prospect of helping you. You're desperately scrabbling for any help you can get, and you only really get the ball rolling thanks to your companions. And for a large portion of the game, every time you make progress, the world takes something from you or your allies in return. I'm going to get into them in more detail in a moment, but can I just say that I really like the companions in this game. They're incredibly well written and characterized, and I just really enjoyed getting to know them from the word go. I found myself eagerly rushing to any conversation opportunity that presented itself in the lighthouse, and I'm not even joking when I say this, I largely eschewed fast travel for a large portion of the game, on the off chance that I could hear more of their banter and commentary on my way to a quest objective. What's more, I really liked the agency they had in the story. You're never just moving things along by yourself, and your companions are always playing a crucial role. When it comes time to kill the gods, Lucanus is always given the special plot convenience knife. When you track down the blighted dragon that attacked your city, Taash is the one to lure it out. It's things like this that make them feel integral to the plot as a whole, and not just helpful additions to the combat that you can also kiss. Oh yeah, that's another thing I liked. The companions have their own agency outside of you. Something I took issue with in Baldur's Gate 3 was how much the game pushed you towards romance, even shaming you if you hadn't chosen someone to bone down with by the second act. And the characters kinda felt like they were largely in camp to be at your discretion, rarely expressing interest in anything outside of you and the occasional implied off-screen coital session with each other. But in Veilguard, and I believe this happened in Inquisition as well, if you don't romance the characters, then they'll grow attached to each other instead, and you can help facilitate their romantic connections as well. I romanced Davrin in my playthrough because he's cool and I like his voice and he's built like a tank, and I later found that Lucanus was sweet on Nev, Emmerich had set up a date with Strife, and Taash was crushing on Harding. One of my favourite parts of the entire game was just being able to advise Taash on how to pursue their interest in our favourite scout.
I want to get her something. What do you think she likes?
Cheese. Everyone likes cheese.
No, I like cheese. Harding deserves better than something I like.
No, I'm serious, Taash. Trust the ancient elven wisdom. You may fascinate a woman by giving her a piece of cheese. It made my fucking day when they actually bought her a cheese wheel and it worked. You have no idea how hard I was laughing. See, that's the thing about the Veilguard companions. They have things going on outside of you. They all have loyalties and stressors that can and will distract them from doing their job, and it's only by helping them through these that they truly become your friends. People with the absolute loyalty necessary to help you fight the gods. That actually brings us to the subject of Rook, because they lie at the center of the whole plot, so I think it's necessary to talk about them for a moment. Rook is something of an outlier to the rest of the main cast, because even though they come from one of the factions of your choosing, they're also estranged from them at the beginning of the story. And I want to be clear that I do like Rook. I've got a major issue with them, and it's probably my biggest issue with the game as a whole, but I think they work well as the linchpin of the cast. While the finer details of Rook's personality are yours to mold, they are ultimately their own character. They enjoy puns, the ziplines in Treviso make them nervous, and they're generally a nice and likeable person. And they're also so incredibly out of their depth, they just might drown.
And now, I die.
But it's the niceness that I wanted to talk about, because one of the complaints I've heard about the game is that Rook is too nice, and I take exception to that. See, my problem with this complaint isn't that it isn't a real problem, which it isn't, or that it's completely fucking asinine, which it is, but that it deliberately misses the point. The thing about Rook is that their job isn't just to kill the gods, their job is to keep hope alive and earn the trust of their companions. And you just can't do that if you're an asshole. Rook needs all the help they can get, because, as I mentioned before, they don't really have anything to start with. They have Harding and Nev, and through their connections they have the potential to gain more allies, but it's literally just that. Potential. You're given the opportunity to gain allies and resources, but that opportunity would be squandered if you were a jerk who treated everyone like shit. And believe it or not, the writers still have to think logically. The most consistent thing about Rook, no matter the background chosen, is that they care about people. They get in trouble with your chosen faction because they threw caution to the wind to save lives, upsetting people in power, but ultimately doing the right thing. This is what draws Varric to them, and it's ultimately what draws their companions to them and keeps them together.
My friend, she knew the risks, and she still volunteered. She chose as much as I did. We all believed in what we were fighting for, what we're still fighting for. And Nev knew what it might cost.
She did, kid. We all did. Because you always chose the hard truth over the easy lie.
Player freedom will always be somewhat incompatible with a satisfying narrative experience. The writers cannot account for every random desire a player might have, and even if they could, the story would suffer from attempting to accommodate said desires. So game devs need to draw a line somewhere, and that tends to be what certain gamers chafe against. See, there's a portion of gamers who don't really want to play a game about characters, they just want to insert themselves into the game. But that doesn't make for a satisfying narrative experience for anyone. Which is why I've always respected it when the writers just say, this is your character. No, they are not literally you, get the fuck over it. The promise of a 100% reactive world and customizable experience is a fucking lie, and one that gamers need to get the fuck over. A lack of asshole potential is not an objective problem with the game. And for what it's worth, Rook can be a jerk to people. But they're a jerk to people who deserve it, not to your companions who are just trying to find a way to help the world survive the worst thing that's happened to it in 10,000 years. Varric wouldn't have recruited that person anyway. Rook is exactly the kind of person the Veilguard needs to succeed, and that person is a hell of a lot nicer to their friends than some people seem to want to be. You know, looking back on the story as I write this, I find I'm actually really impressed by how well the themes of the greater narrative resonate within the personal stories of the companions. When I first started playing the game, I felt that the major themes were that of death and rebirth, which isn't an inaccurate assessment by any means, but now I find that it's more appropriate to say the major themes are loss, new beginnings, and above all, hope, and these themes permeate every section of the game. As they lose their place in wherever the hell they're fromsville, and find a home and family in the Veilguard. Doubly so if you're playing a trans or non-binary character. And nowhere is this as true as with your companions, each of whom struggle to find their bearings as things change and they're forced to adapt. And what I absolutely love, and it's probably my favourite thing about the game's narrative as a whole, is that while you and your companions and their factions and even the world as a whole are moving towards a new future, the villains are all people who would stand in the way of that. The bad guys are all people who refuse to let go of some ideal version of the past and are willing to side with the gods and deprive the world of its future in the process. Nev is a private investigator working the streets of Dogtown, the Minrathous equivalent to the slums, and the thing is, she chooses to be there. She stays because she values the people and because she cares about her home and wants to keep it safe from the exploitation of higher powers. And all of this puts her in opposition to Aelia, a high-ranking member of the Venatori, and also a massively fascistic bitch. Now, Aelia hates Nev with a burning passion, but it's not just because Nev gets in her way, it's because Nev is a refutation of everything she believes in. Nev is anti-slavery, doesn't believe in mage supremacy, cares about the common people, and is an even more powerful mage than Aelia, even after the bitch gains power from the Evanuris. Aelia, meanwhile, wants to bring back Tevinter's quote-unquote glorious past, which is essentially Dragon Age's equivalent of bringing back the British Empire, slavery and genocide included. She wants to undo all social progress to promote an agenda of human mage supremacy, and she doesn't care how many of the residents of Dogtown die in the process because she doesn't see them as people. Nev sees the people of Dogtown for the individual and pertinent lives that they are, and fights to give them a better life, but Aelia sees them as an exploitable resource, mere blood as grease for the wheels of her progress.
How many bled for Tevinter's old power? How many died?
Worthy gifts for our shared glory.
She idolizes a time of complete fascistic imperialism, a time when someone with Nev's talent should be at the top of the world. And because of this, she needs to see Nev fall. She cannot reconcile the difference between her sad worldview and reality, and so she deludes herself into believing she's a hero to the people of Minrathous, even though she would kill any number of them to see her goal fulfilled.
You aren't the future, Aelia. You're a murderer.
I am Minrathous, its dark truth and bright power. The city won't miss you. Dogtown won't too.
Dogtown has you, and they see it. Just one hope, a chance.
When this is over, I will bring it to them.
You won't. But I'll give it a shot.
No!
Whether from the shadows or in the light, Nev represents a newfound hope and a brighter future for the people of Dogtown. She is their new beginning, and Aelia and her fascist ideology have no place in that. Things like this continue to pop up all throughout your companion's personal questlines. Davrin is in a similar boat to Nev, although his new beginning comes twice within the game. Davrin is a Grey Warden, an elite group of fighters infected by the Blight and living with the knowledge that it will one day be their end. But Davrin is also made into the partner of Asan, one of the very few remaining griffins in the world. And when Asan's siblings are taken by a unique monster known as the Gloom Howler, it becomes his mission to track it down and save them to ensure the world still has griffins at all. Davrin's dedication to his mission, both as Asan's partner and as a Grey Warden, is absolute, and so when it comes time to slay an Archdemon, an act that has always killed the Warden who struck the final blow in the past, he's willing to give his life. But he doesn't die. The rules of the Blight are changing and Davrin has to change with them. He's lived his life so far knowing that his future was far more finite than anyone else, and now that certainty is gone, there's a strange comfort to be found in despair, in giving in and accepting the inevitable, and he doesn't have that now. He had no plans for having an actual future, and now he has to find a new meaning and a new reason to live. This actually brings us back to the Griffins, because at the end of his quest, you have to choose between setting them up as new partners for the Grey Wardens, or as guardians of nature, literally deciding a new beginning for a species that was long thought to be extinct, and was almost made extinct by the Gloom Howler. A former warden who, thanks to the Blight twisting her grief, grew fixated on the past and almost repeated the mistake that doomed the Griffins in the first place.
What about this feather? It belonged to a griffin you cared for, didn't it?
Ravers.
That was your mount?
And a friend.
Did the Blight free it from pain?
It drove her mad. I had to put her down.
And you would do the same to these Griffins?
I'm sorry.
It's not always malice that causes someone to cling to the past. Sometimes it's simple misguidance. Isaiah meant well, but she couldn't have been more wrong. If you hadn't stopped her, she would have caused the extinction of the very creatures she loved and sought to protect. Lucanus, and by extent the Antiban Crows, are another example of this, though admittedly more complicated to talk about. Lucanus' character arc is largely defined by an important story choice you make in the game, and because of how I dealt with that choice, he ended up closing himself off and his personal storyline became more about the city of Treviso than Lucanus himself. His personal storyline actually revolves around identity and autonomy from what I can tell, but the ability to influence that was lost to me after I chose Minrathous over his home, so I apologise for not being able to talk about it more. See, at a point in the story, you have to choose between saving either Minrathous or Treviso from a pair of blighted dragons, with horrible ramifications for the city you didn't pick. And I didn't pick Treviso, so it ended up blighted and dying. But even in this state, the story still follows the themes. The city is transformed into a blighted mess, with people dying or turning into Darkspawn on the reg, and a philosophical struggle breaks out between the Crows, who run the city like an especially stabby mafia, and Governor Venchi, the actual politician in charge of Treviso who ends up being the bad guy. I'd spoiler that, but I assumed you could figure out that someone who looks and sounds like a very evil vizier wasn't going to be on your side at the end. The thing about Venchi is that, while they do care about their city, they become too fixated on it as it was before the Blight, and they lose the ability to visualize its future, eventually attempting to euthanize it rather than allow it to fester and die or become something completely unrecognizable. What ultimately sets Venchi and the Crows apart is that the Crows are willing to stick with their city and its people through anything to see it reborn, and eventually is unable to move past their despair, ultimately becoming a greater villain than the child-kidnapping assassin Mafia does. Next we have Ballara, who actually has one of the best written storylines in the game and honestly in almost any game I've played recently. Ballara is a Veil Jumper, a group consisting mainly of elves who work to explore the elven ruins of Arlathan Forest and uncover the history of their people. And Ballara may be the most invested in the history of the elven people of anyone in the cast, working tirelessly to understand the truth of what happened to her people and their past. But she also lost her brother when she was younger, something she blames herself for, and has been completely unable to move on from him, idolizing the man he once was to the detriment of her own growth as a person. It turns out he's actually alive, but now in service to a blighted demon god and willingly sacrificing elves to further its goals, and Ballara is forced to reconcile the man her brother has become against the idea of him that she's been unable to let go of. She does manage to get through to him, but not before he's killed and she ultimately loses him again, though at least she's given the chance to say goodbye this time. This actually ties amazingly well into the story of the elves themselves, who were oppressed by their gods in the ancient past so much that it fractured their entire culture and left them vulnerable to be completely shattered by the Tevinters. But they've spent the last several thousand years believing in an idea of their gods that were passed down, only now to have been forced to face the reality of what their history truly was. The history of Thedas is rife with massive amounts of racism against the elves, and in each game, they largely end up being just slightly less fucked than they were at the start. And depending on your origin, the first game starts with you being chosen to be a rape victim for a human noble, so that should tell you a lot. But Veilguard ends on a surprisingly hopeful note for the elven people, now free of the gods that oppressed them for good, and being given the chance to start again, to build a new future for their people. And Ballara is right there, leading the charge on that new future, finally able to properly grieve and move on. The way these things are tied together is just so fucking good. I was genuinely crying at the end of her storyline. Harding is similar to Ballara in this way, as her storyline involves her discovering the true history of her people. And one that has not just been obfuscated but actively lost. The dwarves were the children of the Titans and were all connected by the Stone Song. But the Evanuris stole power from the Titans, and when the Titans fought back, they made them tranquil, which shattered the connection between the dwarves and rent them apart, destroying their culture and even their identities in the process. But Harding becomes reconnected to the Stone Song, and therefore begins seeking out the truth, eventually reconnecting with a lost dwarven city and discovering the truth of what they had stolen from them. The thing that separates Harding from the rest of the companions is that she doesn't have an enemy to face at the end of her questline. She only has the embodiment of her pain and rage. And this might seem odd at first, considering how each other character has a thematically appropriate villain to face, but it makes sense when you realise who Harding is. She's someone who struggles with expressing negativity, who had to work her whole life to be cheerful and helpful so that people would want her around. And so when she learned the truth of her people, she couldn't deal with it on top of her grief over losing Varric and the stress of trying to save the world, and so she repressed her feelings on it. But you simply cannot bury this kind of pain and expect it to go away, and so it manifested and became something she couldn't ignore.
Anger. And pain. My anger and my pain.
You cast me out!
I couldn't bear it.
Harding's personal quest ends with her becoming the catalyst for the dwarves' new future, connecting them to a history and divine parentage that was stolen from them. And the reason she doesn't have a villain to face at the end is because the true villain of her story has already been penciled in to be faced later. It's the Evanuris. It's Elgernon and Gillenade and Solus, the people responsible for wronging the dwarves in the first place. And they will be faced, but she cannot truly face them until she understands herself and becomes whole. Then there's Emmerich, and I love the Professor, I really do, but he sadly feels like the most superfluous member of the cast, only really tangentially related to the story as a whole, though what we do get is still really good. Emmerich is a Myrn Watcher, people dedicated to the sanctity of life, death and unlife, and rather ironically for a necromancer, the dude is terrified of death. He lost his parents in a rather brutal accident as a child that left him with serious PTSD, and his storyline revolves around finding a way to overcome that fear and no longer allow the past to control him, either through accepting death as a part of him and becoming a lich, or through finding comfort and meaning in the legacy he'll leave behind, knowing that it's through his actions that he'll become immortalized in the hearts of those who knew him. His personal villain is Johanna Heavencost, who I honestly fucking love the most out of any villain in this game, but is also sadly underwhelming on a thematic level. Maybe I missed something, and please feel free to share in the comments if you feel you had a better grasp on her character and all of that. But her issue largely is just that she's an unethical grudge holder who cannot let go of past slights, no matter how minor, and that ultimately leads to her downfall. She's honestly just the most fun, but I really don't have much else to say on her and Emmerich. They're both just kind of also there. And that just leaves Taash, who I do have a lot to say about, but that all ties into the transgender conversation as a whole, so let's move on to that now, shall we?
Who is the real Taash?
She is... They are... not a woman. Or a man.
If you're just joining us now, then hi, how are you? Having a good day? As I mentioned 12 pages and 6,000 words ago, Veilguard was largely brought to my attention by commenters on my non-binary character design video, who were hoping for my take on Taash, as well as how the game handled the topic of trans and non-binary representation as a whole, which is honestly completely understandable, because if there's one thing this game got attention for, it was the trans topic. Now, I'm not here to comment on the drama surrounding the game's inclusion of gender identity options. It's been talked about by a lot of people who actually give a shit about YouTube drama, and I'd like to think that most of you are smart enough to know that the duplicitous dipshits screaming about pronouns are acting in bad faith, and I'd rather just talk about the things I actually care about. Veilguard got a lot of attention for its trans and non-binary options, though simply having them isn't a new thing, though it's a lot more common in the indie sphere than the AAA gaming one. While choosing a gender has been an option in games for decades now, and games have included non-binary characters for a bit, there haven't been a huge number of games that allowed you to be non-binary, and most that have still largely operate on the mindset of the gender binary in terms of the design, but that last part is a topic for another day. What's important is that Veilguard has the options, and it does them pretty well. And while it does do things like allowing you to have mastectomy scars and have your pronouns not match your chosen gender identity, both of which I think are really cool and open up a lot of options for non-binary players of all kinds, they're far from the most interesting part. No, I think the best part of all this is that Veilguard allows your gender identity to be a factor in the narrative itself. A trans or non-binary rook is allowed during certain conversations to bring up their gender identity. You're allowed to talk about what it means to you, to determine where you're at in your journey of self-acceptance and transformation, and even relate this information to other characters. And I honestly think this should be the new gold standard for representation in gaming. Being able to assert my identity in a game for the first time, it resonated with me in a way that I honestly wasn't prepared for.
There they are. The person I knew I was. I did the work, I stuck with it, and now I get to see them every time I look in the mirror.
It was powerfully affirming in a way that no other game has been, and it means something to me that someone on the development team obviously cared enough about this to put it in the game and make it as nuanced as it is. You don't actually start out with the options, but you do get them fairly early on when you're decorating a room and looking into Varric's mirror, which, okay, this is actually my first and biggest complaint with it. You can't pick different options in the mirror. You only get to choose one of the 6 options, and then you're never able to pick up the mirror again. So if you're an idiot like me who was curious about the tattoo options, you'll lock yourself out of enabling the trans options and have to reload a save. This is fucking stupid. Patch it. There's no reason someone shouldn't be able to go back and enable different options, or explore their rook's cultural and gender identity at the same time. My second problem with all this, and I know this is going to sound ungrateful, but I wish it came up more in the story. Despite the gender identity conversation choices being really good, they almost never came up, to the point that I was actually wondering if my game was bugged or if I'd forgotten to enable them. There are moments in the game that would have been made so much better if I were given the option to talk about my gender identity, such as if I were allowed to relate to Flynn when they talk about theirs, or being able to tell Shathan I'm not a man when she calls me one. Even if it didn't change anything, even if all it led to was Shathan going, and continuing on, I'd still have appreciated the ability to assert my gender there. I'm not asking to be able to bring it up in every conversation, that would be fucking ridiculous. But being able to talk about it with more characters than just Taash and whoever you end up romancing would have been nice. Oh yeah, there are other non-binary characters in the game, by the way, did you know that? Because I was super happy when I found out. In my Best Games I Played 2024 video, I criticised BG3 for not including non-binary characters other than the player and 2 literal soulless monsters that you have to go out of your way to even meet. But Veilguard has 3 of the NB fuckers running around, and even a few that are brought up in conversation.
Oh, Taash isn't the first non-binary member of the Lords.
Really?
It was a little before your time, but Horlicks was one of ours. Huh. Bastard looked better than I did in a dress or pants. And out of them too.
Outside of our beloved Taash and your rook, if you decide to go that way, there are 2 other NBs you can encounter. The first is Flynn, who I don't have footage of because I'm an idiot who didn't record their fucking quest, but rest assured they are lovely. The second is Governor Evenchi, and what I actually really like about this is that between the 3 characters, you get a good range of gender presentation, with Taash presenting more femme, Flynn presenting androgynously, and Evenchi being pretty masculine. I think this might actually be the first time I've ever seen a bald NB with a beard in media. It's really nice to see that. All of this comes together to give a pretty realistic take on being non-binary in the world. It's rare, but not unheard of, and we come in all shapes and sizes. And that, finally, brings us to Taash.
Hey.
Taash is an interesting character because everything about their identity is being pulled in different directions. They were born in the Qun, but their mother didn't want them to be turned into a berserker as a result of their ability to breathe fire, so she fled with them to Writin. Because of this, Taash is torn between the culture they grew up in and the one their mother wants for them. And this state of being torn extends to the rest of their identity, from their heritage to their gender, and this has made them into someone constantly struggling with their sense of self. One of the complaints I heard about Taash before I ever played the game is that they act like a petulant teenager. And you know what? That was actually my first impression of them as well. When you first meet them, they're really rather gruff, standoffish, and remarkably short-tempered. And if you're like me, you'll probably think, fuck me, you're gonna be like this the whole time. And then you meet their mother and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that checks out.
It is good you are joining Rook's team.
I'm what?
We're looking for a good dragon hunter. That would be you.
Yeah?
Our contact here said you'd agreed to join us.
Didn't Shathan... I thought you and your mother had agreed on this.
Nope.
Whoops.
See, the thing about Taash is that their attitude makes perfect sense when you realise that they've had everything about them dictated by their mother for their entire life, and they've never really had the chance to explore themselves because Mommy Dearest is so controlling. And Shathan is also an interesting character in her own right. People raised in the Qun live in roles designated for them, and Shathan's role was as a scholar. Ideally, someone else would have raised Taash in her stead. But we don't live in an ideal world, and Shathan was forced to take on a role that she wasn't really suited for. Well, I mean, in all fairness, nobody is ever truly prepared to be a parent, but Shathan was never taught any part of how to be a mother, and so she seriously struggles with it.
I have failed, yes. I was never taught how to be a mother. Under the Qun, children are raised by those suited to such pursuits. I trained as a scholar. I was taught to think critically, to analyze without passion, and correct mistakes. You need not tell me that I am an inadequate mother. I am aware.
Then why did you leave?
When I see my child in danger, I act.
It's obvious that the two love each other very much, but their relationship has grown seriously strained due to Shathan's controlling nature. She wants Taash to hide their fire, to be more of a woman, to be more Qunari. And that's just not who Taash is.
Perhaps because in some ways, she acts more like a man herself.
And this is Taash's biggest source of conflict, because they do want to be a proper daughter and make their mother happy, but doing so doesn't make them happy.
Taash, do you like being a woman?
Nobody likes being a woman.
Ah.
This is stupid. Forget I said anything.
I've seen people criticize this scene, but I really like it for a couple of reasons. The first, and this is something I mentioned back in my non-binary character design video, realizing you're trans isn't like knowing you're cis, because for most people, you have to realize what you're not first, and this holds especially true for non-binary people. It can be hard to come to terms with the idea that you're neither a man nor a woman, and that can take many forms, one of which is denial, assuming that everyone else must feel this way, and I think that this is what's going through Taash's mind. It must be normal to hate being a woman because it's normal for me. Yeah, the whole thing is simple, but that doesn't mean it's bad. And the second thing I like is this.
I used to tell myself things that sound like what you're saying. I felt wrong in my own skin. I didn't know why. I figured everyone felt like that, so I pushed it away and tried not to think about it. Until one day I finally realized what was wrong. I'd grown up in this box the world made for me. This is what a man is. This is what a woman is. But I wasn't a man and I wasn't a woman. I was me.
So, what? You just changed?
No, it took a long time to get there. I was afraid to admit I might be wrong about something as simple as whether I was a man or a woman. So I did little things. I changed my hair, my clothes. I wasn't deciding anything, just trying it out. I followed things that felt right, and eventually what felt right was who I am now.
And you're saying I'm like you?
One of the first things you told me was, you don't get to tell me who I am. Whether you're like me or dealing with some other pain, well, only you can figure that out.
Okay. I'll try. And thanks for telling me about you.
Anytime.
This is fucking amazing. If your character identifies as non-binary, you can relate to Taash. You can use your own experience to help them understand that there is another option, that they don't have to be a woman if it doesn't make them happy. And obviously this isn't the end of it for Taash. Their conflict can't be solved that easily, but you're still there to help them through it, to give them the comfort they need to overcome their self-loathing and the courage to come out. And this is what ultimately brings us to the scene most people seem to get stuck on when they talk about Taash.
So, I'm non-binary.
What does that mean?
It means I don't feel like a man or a woman.
If you are neither a man nor a woman, then what are you?
Non-binary. I just said, and I'm going to use they instead of she from now on.
If this is because I have criticized your dress or your manners...
It isn't!
Under the Qun, the term for one whose gender does not match the one given to them at birth was a Qunathlok. Perhaps you are like that.
Why do you have to keep picking at it? Why can't you just be happy for me?
Evatash, Chakra Toebra.
So I'm supposed to struggle with who I am? Even if I don't feel like I fit, even if I feel wrong?
No, you misunderstood.
Then say it better! Why am I never enough for you?
I will go. Thank you for inviting me to your home. Panahedan.
Okay, not to be obvious, but I really like this scene. It's pretty obvious Chthon has absolutely no idea what non-binary means and is trying to relate it back to a term in the Qunari language that she does understand, one that refers to trans people in general. But this comes across as more dictation of their language, and Taash is so sensitive to Chthon doing that they immediately become upset and defensive because they think the worst fear has been realized and that Chthon is rejecting them. And for all of her faults, Chthon isn't an idiot. She recognizes that her child won't be receptive to further discussion in such a heightened emotional state, so she does the only thing that makes sense to her and removes herself from the equation, which doesn't leave the best impression, but is all she can think to do to keep from further upsetting them. What I really like about this scene is that it's the natural outcome of who both people are. Taash is so sensitive to Chthon's criticism, and Chthon is so hardwired to picking things apart to understand them that there really couldn't have been a different outcome here. I've heard some people complain that they shouldn't be using the term non-binary here because it's not fantasy enough, but I think that's completely fucking stupid. For one thing, people only ever say this sort of bullshit when it comes to LGBT terminology. We're allowed to say fuck and detective and elevator, but apparently non-binary or bisexual or gay is where the fucking line is drawn, and the reason for this is fucking obvious. Erasure. Assholes want to be able to ignore the fact that queer people exist, but just saying that would make people immediately clock them for the shitheads they are. So they try to hide it behind fantasy rules lawyering, and then idiots in the actual community take them at face value and go, you know, maybe it does break the immersion to acknowledge that gay people exist, and I have to take another drink to numb the desire to break their fucking kneecaps. More importantly though, removing the word non-binary would also change the meaning of the scene. If they came up with a new term like, I don't know, gender-faded, if they did that, this would change from a scene about a mother from one culture, utterly failing to understand the language and terminology of her child from another, to one where Chthon serves as the audience surrogate for a lore exposition dump, and it would have made the story, and more importantly the representation, so much fucking worse. It's extremely important that the player be given the context necessary to not end up sitting on Chthon's side of the table. And it's also worth noting that this is the only time in the game thus far that the term non-binary has even been used. So yeah, this is actually a really good scene. All of this culminates in the confrontation with the Dragon King.
Dragons don't have kings.
Yeah, I fucking know. And just like the other villains, this loser is fucking obsessed with an idealized version of the past, spurred on by a might makes right mentality and a promise from the gods for more power, and to that end he kidnaps Chthon to lure Taash into a trap, leading to one of the most powerful scenes in the game.
You are wrong, Atashak. Chakra Toebra is not an order to struggle against what you are. It is a reminder that through struggle you find what you are, and you have never done so. Evatash has. They are stronger than you will ever be. Rook, you will keep them safe.
Chakra Toebra.
Tama?
Taash! Move!
You know, I saw someone claim that Chthon was fridged, and no she wasn't. Fridging refers to when a character is brutally killed, specifically to hurt another character and motivate them to action, and that's all. This is not fucking that. This is Chthon making good on her statement that when her child is in danger, she acts. And her final act wasn't just to save her child's life, it was to affirm their identity and acknowledge their strength. And Chthon's death weighs heavily on everyone, most of all Taash, especially because they have to leave her body behind. It's a tragic and beautiful end to a character that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that she loved her child and cared for their safety and happiness above all else, even if she struggled to understand them. Taash is such a good character and their story is so fucking well done. It might be simple, especially for people who are already familiar with trans and non-binary issues, but that doesn't make it bad. Honestly, I think the biggest issues with Taash's storyline come in at the very end, and they're less bad and more weird. The first issue is Taash's culture identity, which is brought down to a weirdly binary choice between embracing the Qun or Raveni culture, which just isn't how having a mixed cultural heritage really works. I've seen people suggest it's this way because the lead writer is whiter than a polar bear in a blizzard, but I don't think that's the case. In her own video on the game, CD Cole suggested that Taash's cultural heritage came down to a binary choice because of the Hero of the Veilguard mechanic, and I'm inclined to agree. However, I really don't think it should have gone down like this. Considering Taash's thing is, you don't get to tell me who I am, and there's an entire scene where you talk about how important it is to embrace the different parts of who you are, I honestly think it would have been better if you just didn't get to choose Taash's ending, and they chose between the two options for themselves, or better yet, if they eschewed the binary choice altogether and chose a third option. I'm perfectly okay having less choice in this case if it makes the narrative stronger, and I think it would. The other issue with Taash's storyline is, well, it's this scene.
Best part is, while Taash is pounding that snake's nose, she's still holding the ruby in her other hand. Maker's panties, I was so proud.
Oh,
Ah, shit. They're still holding it, sorry.
What are you doing?
Pulling a barb.
Oh, okay.
A barb?
Tradition in the Lords of Fortune, from one of our old members, Barv. Good guy, but like most of us, his plans went sideways a lot. Bad blood among your crew's not good for morale, but there's not always time for big, drawn-out apologies. So, when one of us screws up and we know we've screwed up, we do a quick 10 to put it right. Pulling a Barv. Oh, there we go.
Any reason you can't just apologize?
Sometimes people say, oops, sorry, and hope that fixes it. But they just want to get the whole thing over with. Trust me, I know. But pulling a Barv, you sweat a little. Makes you think about it a little more. Shows the other person you mean it.
What if they mean it when they say they're sorry, though?
And that's the other reason. Some people mess up and get all dramatic. They make it about them. Oh, you know, I didn't mean it right. I'd never do that on purpose. They feel so bad about it that it's on everyone else to smooth it over and make them feel better.
Oh, okay, yes, some people might do that.
Pulling a Barv puts it on the person who screwed up. They made the mess, they fix it, done.
I sort of found this bit fucking hilarious because it is so weird and out of place in a story that's otherwise been handling the topic with a good deal of nuance and tact. It's like one of those old after-school specials from the 80s, but the lesson is just say no to misgendering. It's kind of surreal.
Guess I'm allergic.
I kind of found this to be charmingly stupid, not gonna lie. Quick tip for anyone with a non-binary friend, we actually genuinely prefer if you don't make a big deal out of it and just give a quick apology before you try harder. If you want to pull a Barv, I guess you can, but it's not really necessary. But yeah, that's it for Veilguard's trans topic. Overall, I'd say it does remarkably well, and I'd like to see more games follow in its lead in the future. Alright, moving on.
I trained as a scholar. I was taught to think critically, to analyze without passion, and correct mistakes.
Okay, so since there's no such thing as perfection and everything can be improved, I do have a short list of petty complaints and actual criticisms for the game. To start with, Veilguard doesn't seem especially well optimized. My desktop isn't the biggest powerhouse in the world, but I was still able to play Baldur's Gate 3 with minimal technical difficulties. Veilguard, meanwhile, was kind of a mess of pop-in issues. They rarely actually got in the way, but more than once I was halted in the middle of my exploration because a shop stall had decided to go invisible and not tell me until I was sprinting into the side of some poor bastard's business for 10 seconds, apparently hoping to dislodge it from the world geometry through sheer force of will. The game also bugged out a couple of times and enemies would just stop taking damage and progression would simply halt until I restarted the game. This only happened in Treviso though, so I'm not sure if it's a problem with Lucanus' questline or the city itself. Finally, the first time I booted up the game, it took 24 literal actual minutes to load all of the fucking shaders necessary to even start the game. It didn't get this bad again, but it was pretty common to have to wait 2 to 3 minutes to load all the shaders for the game when starting it up again. I'm not the most knowledgeable about the technical side of things, but this seems like too many shaders to me. Maybe put some of those back. Gameplay wise, and this is more of a petty complaint than a real criticism, but I often found my damage output just didn't seem like enough. Some enemies just have way too much health for the amount of damage you dish out, and that's before you add in barriers and armor. And this holds especially true for the fucking dragon fights. Maybe I've been spoiled by Elden Ring, but the dragon fights in this game are just a fucking slog to get through, and they're not even that challenging. The big flying bitches just have way too much health, and are annoying to pin down, and they're just not very fun for me. Lastly, on the gameplay front, and this ties into the damage output issue, but I think both you and your companion's abilities have a little bit too long of a cooldown timer, especially since combat can become so reliant on detonations and abilities are the only way your allies will deal any real damage. The hardest fight in this game wasn't even against the gods, it was against a fucking bitch of an optional boss that healed itself every time it hit you and teleported way too often. I couldn't even detonate the bastard, it would teleport every time I tried, and I ended up in this bitch of an attrition war where I'd mage beam it until I ran out of mana and then use a rune to replenish and do it all over again, and it just wasn't fucking fun, okay? The Scarecrow can eat my entire poison type ass. But by far my biggest criticism, and this is something that really bothered me, is that the game doesn't fully commit to Rook as their own character. I've seen people complain about how Rook doesn't feel like the main character of the game, and that's not what I'm talking about here. I honestly couldn't care less about that. See, my issue is that Rook is the only character to never be given the same consideration as the others. A thing I really loved about this game is that it acknowledges the weight of what's going on in people's lives. After you slay Gilneane's archdemon, which definitely didn't take me 4 fucking tries because I'm an idiot who only brought 2 stabby boys to the boss fight instead of a fucking healer, you get an opening and throw Lucanus the dagger, and the motherfucker misses his shot because he's still in conflict with spite. This actually forms the backbone of the latter half of the story. It's made very clear that you need to help people be at their best, to overcome their personal trauma and grief so that they can be there fully when you fight the gods, and the game actually does a really good job of this. Some of my very favourite parts are when you finally hit a breakthrough with a character's storyline, and everyone's emotional needs are taken seriously. But not Rook. Rook has never shown the same consideration, even though they have more to deal with than anyone. And it's not that the companions aren't there for them, it's that the story isn't. Rook has so much weighing on them at all times, being thrust into a leadership role for an impossible task going up against forces they couldn't even imagine when this all began, and they're just expected to soldier on regardless. I think what really pushed this over the edge for me is that when Solus suddenly but inevitably betrays you and locks you in the depression dungeon after one of your friends is killed helping bring down Gilneane, it's revealed that Varric was actually dead the whole time. He died when Solus stabbed him at the ritual site, but Solus used blood magic to put a phantom of him in Rook's mind to spur them on. Rook's right to grieve was taken from them, and they only find out the truth after watching another friend die, but they're just expected to keep going and get right back into the fight after escaping? In all fairness, the story addresses this, kind of, if you talk to your companions after escaping the prison, but even then you're mostly consoling them and then moving on to the next mission. Why is it like this? Why is every other character allowed to grieve and cry and just stop for 5 minutes to handle their suffering, but Rook's pain and loss is essentially hand-waved in an emotional death march to the next story beat? Nobody can be strong forever, no matter who you are. Everyone needs to take time to be weak, lest they break entirely, but Rook just never gets that. I've seen this running theory online that the companions are each trying to help Rook handle the loss of Varric by spending time with him, but because of Solus's blood magic, Rook isn't able to comprehend that. But aside from this being just a theory, it also doesn't address the problem that Rook's loss is practically glossed over because the story needs them to be strong. It's presented in a "I'll have time to break down about it later" sort of way, but nobody else has to do that. Everyone else still gets to take the time they need. Look, I'm not saying we need an entire quest dedicated to unpacking their grief and loss, but there should be fucking something. Can you imagine if, instead of going right from being pulled from the Fade to another meeting, the game stopped for 2 fucking minutes and let them just cry, surrounded by their friends? If they could just take a minute to grieve for what they lost and were given the same kindness and care that they show everyone else? I think the story would be much stronger if we were allowed to see that happen. This isn't a huge issue in the long run, and I understand it's something that won't bother most people, but it is something that bothered me. Oh yes, and this may be the pettiest complaint I've ever indulged in, but why the fuck can't I jump past half the ladders in this game? I recognise that Rook moves up and down them incredibly quickly, but maybe I don't want to go up and down these little tracks and would rather skip the whole damn thing. But half the time it just teleports you back before you hit the ground and wastes my goddamn time. Why does it do this? There's no fucking fall damage in this game, and even if there were, who fucking cares? This isn't Dark Souls, where falling more than 10 feet instantly kills you because your knees explode and the shrapnel shreds your internal organs. Just let me take the fucking fall damage and be on my fucking way if you don't think jumping down without consequence would be realistic. I shouldn't have to shackle myself to your horizontally barred puppet strings, Bioware, you stupid controlling Fuck ladders in video games. All my homies hate ladders in video games. Okay, glad I got that all off my chest. On we go then.
We sold lyrium to the Tevinter Imperium. Titan blood, our blood, traded for gold. So they could use it for magic. The elves stole lyrium from the Titans to make themselves bodies. And eons later, we gave it to a new generation of mages. All on our own.
You know, I'm actually really bad at keeping up with the discourse surrounding the topics I discuss in my videos. I usually just sort of fall into it afterwards thanks to my comment section, which is what happened with my recent Helliverse video. But I really did try to engage with the discourse surrounding Veilguard in preparation for this one, and once I sorted through the losers crying about whatever woke personally means to them, and the people complaining about things super specific to the franchise that I can't comment on, I found a good deal of people whining that the game was sanitized and not as dark as the rest of the series. And I look at these people, and then I look at Veilguard, and I have to wonder if we even played the same fucking game. Because Veilguard is one of the darkest pieces of media I've played in my life, almost oppressively so. And this is all the more impressive considering that, while the Dragon Age series has always billed itself as dark fantasy, it's never really been that. It's always just been fantasy with some dark topics thrown in. But in Veilguard, regret, loss, strife, and grief permeate a story fueled by a force of almost cosmic horror. The world is facing its darkest hour as your attempt to stop one pride-blinded jackass releases ancient and powerful tyrants that seek to destroy everything to rebuild the kingdom of oppression that they once ruled over. And in doing so, they worsen everything that's already horrible in the world, empowering smaller tyrants like the Venatori, and wielding the force of corruption and death that is the Blight like a cudgel against the unprepared world. You can do nothing but watch as Gillenane raises the forces of the Grey Wardens. You have to choose a city to save, knowing full well the other will be doomed. You have to send your allies into the final battle knowing full well they could die. For fuck's sake, Harding's story is about discovering and finding a way to recover from the cultural genocide of her people, and you want to tell me this game isn't dark?
They broke us into 1,000,000 pieces, and this is all that's left. They built their world on the wreckage of us. Vengeance is all we have.
But the thing is, I do know what people mean when they say these things. There's this notion amongst a particularly insecure group of people that mature storytelling is inherently better. But because they equate dark with mature, that means, in their poisoned brains, dark is better. And fans of the series like that almost always point to Origins as some kind of dark and mature masterpiece because it has rape and racism in it. Not because it does anything with these things or says anything about them, but just that it has them. And because it has them, it makes it mature and therefore better. This is something I desperately need people to understand. Having a mature rating is not the same as actually being mature. And it's also not an indicator of quality, despite what a lot of stupid people like to think. Things don't get mature ratings because they contain life-changing, thought-provoking content that only those with adult brains can understand. They get them because they have violence and sex and crude humor. Deadpool has a mature rating. South Park has a mature rating. Mortal Kombat has a mature rating. And despite the mature ratings, none of these things are actually mature. But when you're an idiot who only thinks of things in terms of aesthetics and lacks critical thinking skills, then all of this is going to fly over your fucking head. Veilguard is colourful and has a cast that's generally nicer than a broken glass depository, so to them that means it's sanitised and not dark. But Veilguard is emotionally heavier, philosophically deeper, and just generally far darker than Origins ever was, and that's because it has something to actually fucking say with its darkness. This is another thing people tend to misunderstand. Actually, dark stories don't just throw dark shit in and leave it at that. They have something to say. Dark storytelling has a point to make. That's why it's dark. It's to make you think about things, uncomfortable things, and often without the reprieve of a clean answer or a happy ending. Dark without a point is just edgy, and the only thing less mature than edge is the people who try to pretend it's secretly deep. Origins doesn't have a point to its darkness, it just throws in rape and racism because those things are dark and it doesn't bother to do anything with them, making it utterly fucking childish. It just wallows in misery and says, "Ta-da!" and people expect you to be impressed. Veilguard, meanwhile, actually has things to say, and it has characters that are more than just receptacles for torment. Characters experience loss, they struggle with identity and grief and finding reasons to live, but they do find them. Even when you're facing Thetis at its darkest, they still find them. And you are facing Thetis at its darkest, the darkest it's ever been in the series. Of course, that still doesn't make Veilguard dark fantasy, it just means it handles it better than Origins. People die, your companions can die, and one of them will. It's unavoidable. You're constantly on the back foot as you face forces so impossibly powerful that all you can do is try your hardest to find a way to survive, and if you don't prepare for the final battle, you will lose. You will lose everything important to you. You lose so much over the course of this game, and not just battles. Taash loses their mother, Belara loses her brother, Rook loses their mentor, and can lose their friends. But you have to keep fighting, because you still have hope, even when you're forced to make choices with no right answers, choices that will cause someone to get hurt either way because you're just one person, because no matter how hard you try, you cannot save everyone. But you still have to try, because someone has to. Because despite all their power and everything they can do, the gods still bleed. And if they bleed, they can die. I think Demeter's Crossing is one of the best parts of this entire game because it so brilliantly sets up the conflict to follow. You work your way through this town, the gods obliterated with a blight, filled with people whose minds have been utterly destroyed, and at the end, you find out that they were sold out by their own mayor for nothing more than the promise of gold.
I know you. You're the mayor of this town.
The village. The people. Are they,
Blighted. Dead. All of them.
You gave them to the gods, didn't you? Didn't you?
They were in my head. Infecting my thoughts. They made me do it. Please, help me.
You betrayed your own town.
No, I didn't. I was tricked. Manipulated. I tried to protect people. You have to believe me. The gods told me to lure the Veil Jumpers to the center of town. The others were to be rounded up and kept safe. They would be the first to witness the glory of Gilnenane's new creation. She showed me gold. So much gold.
Do you know why this scene is so important? Because it tells you exactly the kind of people you'll be fighting throughout the entire game. The Evanurus didn't control the mayor, nor did they control the rest of the people they enlist to their side. They just offered what he wanted, and he happily sold out his people for it. And then he had the gall to ask me for help. I was almost insulted that the game thought I might want to save the guy. If it had let me, I would have slit his fucking throat right there. This is the game straight up telling you, the corrupt in power will sacrifice everyone to get what they want, and it's right. That's the thing about the faction villains in this game. They're not under anyone's control. Each of them, every single one, is merely offered the power they need to achieve their goals, and all it will cost is the world, and all of them, without hesitation, say yes. They gleefully doom countless people because they know it will get them what they want, and in some cases, that dooming is what they wanted in the first place. There's a part in the game where you have to rescue a group of Dalish elves from the Venatori who plan to sacrifice them to Elgernon's archdemon. The Venatori are willing, and not just willing, but eager, to sacrifice the people of a race they consider lesser than them to someone who will ultimately destroy everything just because they think it will get them what they want. And what happens? They get sacrificed to the demon instead, in a startlingly accurate depiction of the reality of being a Trump supporter. The villains in this game are monsters who don't care how many people they hurt or how much damage they do to the world, so long as it gets them what they want, and this is especially true for the so-called gods. Elgernon and Gillenane are obsessed with reclaiming their lost dynasty, and even Solus, despite alleging himself to be better than them, is willing to do the exact same thing, intent on tearing down the veil and drowning the world in demons because he's fixated on the world as it was before he and the Evanurus fucked it up. And so blinded is he by pride and regret that no number of innocent lives will be too great to sacrifice on the altar of his delusions. These people are cruel, there's no other word for it, and they spread that cruelty around, darkening and twisting every place they touch, even without the blight, and it makes the world a worse place. And they do it so easily. It's so easy for them to hurt and twist people and make everything so much worse. And sometimes it can make you wonder why you're even trying at all. In a world as dark and fucked up as Thedas, what is even the point of fighting? What could possibly make the pain worth it? You know, there's a moment I keep coming back to when writing this script, one I think deserves more recognition. At the end of Belara's quest, she asks you to accompany her in an ancient elven funeral for her brother. And this whole thing is tragic and beautiful, but the moment I'm talking about is something that I haven't seen anyone else mention, and that's when Nev arrives.
Nev, what are you doing here?
What? You know I show up for you, Belle. They'd only let one of us come, though. The rest send their regards, especially Emmerich.
I'm just... Wow. Thank you, Nev. And everyone else.
Hey, as long as I'm around, you've got family. All right, go on and light the brazier.
There were a lot of moments in this game that made me tear up. From happiness, from sorrow, from sympathy. I have rarely ever encountered a game that hit me as hard as this one has so many times. But this moment here, this is the first time I began actively crying. This is a gesture of pure, unadulterated kindness and a moment of grief and despair. And it got to me. Despite the darkness, despite the pain and sadness that this game is so happy to pile on top of you, Veilguard also understands the importance of kindness. Thedas is not a kind place. Bigotry and inequality are everywhere. Death and sorrow are constant companions in these games, and the land itself is sick with a blight, a malevolent force that twists and poisons everything it touches, something that only exists because of the imperialist actions of the elven gods, and is now even employed to be evolving into something even worse, independent of the Evanurus. But even so, there still exists kindness, because there has to be. Because kindness is what keeps hope alive in the face of the death and tyranny brought by the Evanurus. There are so many moments in this game where simple human kindness makes everything a little bit better, a little less miserable and dark. Moments used to remind you that, no matter how messed up this world is, there are still things, still people worth fighting for. You see it when Lucanus takes you shopping and picks out something for every member of the Veilguard because he knows they all need someone to watch out for them, especially when it comes to nutrition. You see it when Taash brings food to Karash and encourages their mother to be gentle with him. When Anton and Evka save Flynn's life from the Blight, but don't force them to become a Grey Warden. It's even found when you decide to talk the first Warden down at Weishaupt. I know it's satisfying to deck the stubborn fuck, and I truly do not judge anyone who did, but if you do talk to him, he retains his sense of self, even after the Gloomhowler takes him below and corrupts him further. Kindness literally saves him from losing who he is, and I think that's beautiful. Some people have complained that you can't be mean in this game. Some people have complained that you don't get to make fun of Taash for being non-binary. And I can only assume these are the same people who whined because they weren't allowed to call elves slurs as well. And my question for you people is, why is that important? And why did you think the game would even let you? Because that would be nothing more than wanton, petty cruelty, and that would never fit within the story that Bioware is trying to tell. Wanton cruelty is antithetical to hope because it is a tool of tyranny, and you cannot meaningfully oppose tyranny with tyranny of your own. That's just replacing one cruel system with another. You can kill the tyrants of this world, you can even kill the gods, but unless you make a better world to live in after, it will all be for nothing. That's what you're doing when you complete the companion quests. You're not just earning their loyalty, you're actively making the world a better, kinder place. People need something to look forward to, something to fight for, and you're giving them that. It's that hope for a better world that allows them to fight, that makes them willing to follow you, possibly to their own deaths, to ensure the world is free, that the elves are free from their oppressors, that the wardens are free from their calling, that the world itself is free from the blight. That's what you're fighting for, and that's why Elgar'non and Gillenane and Solas cannot win, because they're fighting for something they've already lost, but are willing to sacrifice anyone and anything for, because they think their ideal version of the world is worth the genocide. And you're fighting so that those people won't be sacrificed, so that the world of Thedas, for the first time, can be better, so it can have hope. Look, I'm sorry if Veilguard wasn't the game you were hoping for. I'm sorry if it didn't give you the satisfying ending you personally wanted from the series, but let's not pretend that that's an objective problem with the game itself. I'm not going to pretend that this game is perfect. There are plenty of things to criticize about it, many that I didn't bring up because I didn't feel they were big enough deals to be relevant. But something that's important to remember is, I didn't like this, or this game wasn't for me, are not the same as this game is bad. I'm sorry if you didn't enjoy your time with the game, but I'm certainly not sorry if this game about stopping the end of the world doesn't have enough rape and racial slurs for you, you fucking edgelord. Is Veilguard a good entry in the series? I don't know. I'm inclined to say yes, but I can't answer that for you. But is it a good game? Is it a good story? Yes. More than that, it's fucking great. I'd go so far as to say it's better than the majority of the game stories the AAA industry has put out in the last decade. And it sparked an interest in the rest of Bioware's games for me. Because if this is just a good Bioware game, and not a great one like I've been told, then I must have been missing out on something amazing all this time. I'm actually planning on starting the Mass Effect trilogy after this video is finally fucking done. I don't know if there's going to be another Dragon Age game after this, so let me just say that if this is the last one, then I'm glad I got to play it. I'm glad I got to take part in ensuring a future for Thedas that's free from the tyranny of the Avanuris, in creating a world that's just a little bit kinder, because people deserve to live a life without fear of oppression. And this bald bastard deserves a good long sit down in the timeout dimension to think about what he's done, because the Twilight of the Gods is ending now. And it's time for mortals to step into a new dawn.
You think yourself capable of judging me? I have faced things you could not possibly comprehend. You are a mortal! A mortal! And I am... I am a fool who finally met his match.
Here where the gods have been left to decay, here where the hopes of the land boil away. Fight for the light, for the end of the strife. Prove that humanity has earned its life.
Where kingdoms fall,
we shall come back stronger.
With blade in hand,
ruled by gods no longer.
What is life if not defined by pain? Among broken chains.
Into the fire flame, to my shall reign. Praise to his name, the almighty God of strength. Power remains, power from pain. Praise to his name, doom shall reign.
Straight to the weak to let humans survive. With domination, you know you're alive. You speak of love I never provide. Only a rage that shall never subside.
Shall help it stand tall when strength runs low. Love will shield from sorrow. Where kingdoms fall, we shall stand together. With blade in hand, hope shall reign forever.
Hope lies, it will deny you truth. Only might could hope to defy me.
Into the fire and flame, doom shall reign. Praise to his name, the almighty God of strength. Power remains, power from pain. Praise to his name, doom shall reign.
With strength for 'Forged by Miguel, we make our stand.
Show.